Hey, and welcome back to Bible Basics with Ty Campbell. Thank you once again for joining me today. Today we're going to look at a interesting topic, a well-known topic. This is something that comes up quite a bit in churches and really quite a bit in the Christian life in general. And we're going to use Willie Nelson, the country music star, to kind of show this. A lot of people know of Willie Nelson. They know some of his songs, that sort of stuff, but they don't really know pre-fame Willie Nelson. They don't really know his backstory. And also this is not an endorsement of Willie Nelson. Don't get that idea. Let's look at his story a little bit. We're going to read an article here, and really there's several websites that have different articles of his own account. He's even written a book on this topic, so I'm not cherry-picking anything. This is simply his testimony. But as always, if you enjoy this content, subscribe to the channel, follow us. Very simply, leave a comment down below, that sort of stuff. YouTube loves that type of stuff. But let's go ahead and look at this article. This article is from preachingtoday.com. I'm not overly familiar with this website, so I'm definitely not putting my stamp of approval on it or anything, but they do have this article at least that we can look at here. The article is titled, Willie Nelson Chooses Reincarnation Over Hell, and you'll kind of see that as we get into the story as to why the article is titled that. And I think this is very easily applicable to our lives, so stay tuned, if you will. Stay to the end of the video. You'll kind of see how it all pans out as we look at the Bible as well. So Willie Nelson chooses reincarnation over hell. I'm just going to read what they have here. It says in It's a Long Story, My Life by Willie Nelson. That's a book he wrote. Willie recounts his time as a popular Sunday school teacher in Metropolitan Baptist Church. Now, that's not too far from me. It's about 30 minutes or so north of me, up in Fort Worth, Texas. So he says he was a Metropolitan Baptist Church as a Sunday school teacher. It says a popularity he attributed to his openness in exploring spiritual issues. And based on all the other articles I read, he was a very popular Sunday school teacher. Traditionally in churches, the Sunday school crowd is much smaller, or at least some smaller than the church service itself. I've read some articles that said at this time that the Sunday school crowd is almost even bigger than the normal church service. So he was definitely popular, as it says here. It says an openness that led to his eventual dismissal. Willie's dismissal from the church was an opportunity, this in quotes, an opportunity to delve deeper in the mystery of the Holy Spirit. More than ever, I sought to learn about the Lord. And notice this next paragraph. It says this. One book that had a huge impact upon Willie was The Aquarian Gospel of Jesus the Christ, which taught that Jesus discovered and embraced the notion of reincarnation, Willie wrote. And that's a very interesting thing because you don't often hear reincarnation in the same realm of Christianity. Those are usually two opposing deals, but here in the Aquarian Gospel, they do overlap. And notice this last paragraph. It says, from the first moment, I considered the concept of reincarnation. Notice this, he says, it made sense. The old paradigm was just too cruel. Notice this terminology. He says that the old paradigm, he's talking about heaven and hell and that sort of thing. He says the old paradigm was just too cruel, just too unchristian. That's an interesting term to use there. He says just too cruel and too unchristian to be believed. If you die in your sin, he says you spend eternity in hell. And then he tries to reason. He says, how could the compassionate God of mercy ever set up such a system? On the other hand, I was drawn to the idea that you keep coming back till you get it right. Reincarnation seemed merciful and completely Christ-like. Jesus got it right the first time around and was, after all, God incarnate, perfect man. But the rest of us would need several lifetimes to shed our sins and learn the lessons necessary to heal our troubled souls. Now, I had other articles pulled up. They won't quite open at this time. The internet's being funny. But you can go and read them on your own time. There's an article on rollingstones.com. There's other ones like that where he gives a little bit more in-depth detail as to what happened as a Sunday school teacher and what happened as he made his decision to leave. If you look into his story a little bit, his father passed away, I believe, at the age of 6. He started trying to help his family make some money. So he was talented at a young age, musically, just as he is in his old age, I'm sure. And he started singing at clubs and bars and honky-tonks and that sort of thing. And he made a pretty decent amount of money based on what the accounts show. And his mom was directly opposed to the idea because she was born and raised, I believe, a Methodist and now at this point a Baptist. And she was totally against the idea of drinking in bars and all that sort of stuff. And until he started bringing the money home and she saw how much money it was. And she all of a sudden now she's okay with it. I wish I could pull up that Rolling Stones article because it has some good information in there, but you can go look at it in your own time. I think you have one free visit on the site, and after that you got to sign up. But very simply, the way he tells the story in that article is he was teaching Sunday school on Sundays, and then he would go out to the bars and stuff throughout the week, and he was playing and singing for the bars and the clubs and the honky-tonks and making good money. Well, eventually the pastor found out. And eventually the pastor approached him and he said, look, you're going to have to make a decision. He said, you're going to have to choose between teaching Sunday school or singing in the bars. And by the way, I'll say this, kudos to that pastor. That's not an easy thing to do when one of the most popular things in your church is the Sunday school and the Sunday school teacher. I say kudos to that pastor for willing to take a stand and saying, hey, look, we got to have some principles. We have to have some standards. We can't allow this. So when Willie got that ultimatum, he had to choose, teach Sunday school and continue on this path, or do I continue on this path? And when you go and read that, if you read that book, it's a long story, My Life by Willie Nelson, and when you read the excerpts from it, he makes an interesting statement. He says, I had to choose between teaching Sunday school and singing, what I love to do, singing in the bars and the clubs and such. He says, he quotes, he said, I considered being a preacher for a little while, and then he says he laughed about it. He says, but then I realized that preachers don't make much money and they have to work real hard. That's his quote. He said, preachers don't make much money, but they have to work real hard. He said he chose the clubs and the bars and the honky-tonks, that sort of thing, because he made considerably more money. He could have money and fame that direction. So he decided to quit teaching Sunday school and to follow that career path. Of course, if you know anything about music or you're born and raised in the South, you realize that he was fairly successful in the world's eyes in this path. But what I want to look at is kind of the danger here, because although this is a celebrity and although we know his story, we know some of his songs, maybe that sort of stuff, this kind of thing comes up all the time. That there's a decision we have to make as God's people. It usually comes down to a single moment in our lives. For some people, it's several decisions they have to make. But there's a decision you have to make when you got to decide in life, what are you going to get serious about? You know, you can only chase God in the world for so long. One has to win out. And when I say that, there's a lot of people in churches today. They go to church, they sit there, they leave, they get nothing out of it, and they think that they're doing good. They're playing both sides. I hate to burst your bubble, you're not playing both sides, because when you go out in the world, you get something out of it. When you go hang out with your friends, you get something out of it. When you go do your hobbies, you get something out of it. And when you go to church, you don't get anything out of it. You're not playing both sides. Very simply, going to church does not make us Christian. Going to church does not make us God's people. That's not what church is. Just like me going to the gym doesn't make me an athlete. Me going to the garage doesn't make me a car. It requires much more than just going to church, and that's what we need to realize. So here's the point that I'm just trying to get across here is we often, everybody, not a lot of times it happens in the teenage years or late in the teenage years, but for a lot of people that get saved later in life, it happens at any other point. You're going to have to make a decision at some point. Do you want to serve God or do you want to serve this world? And I want to look at a verse here. This is Matthew chapter 6, verse 24. Notice what it says. It says, no man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. Ye cannot serve God and mammon. Of course, looking at the story there of Willie Nelson, this applies perfectly. And looking at the idea where you got to make a decision at some point, this applies perfectly. Again, no man, that means not you, not me, nobody, no man No man can serve two masters. That's important. For he will hate the one and love the other. And by the way, that's eventually what it comes down to. You either love God and hate this world, or you love this world and you hate God. That's where we're at. You talk to good Christian men and women, they can't stand sin. They can't stand the thought of this world and all the atrocities that it has and all the sin that runs rampant, the temptation. And they can't stand that stuff. But at the same time, you go interview this world, they can't stand God. They can't understand church and the things of God, and it bothers them. And so you can't serve two masters. You're either going to hate the one and love the other, or else you're going to hold the one and despise the other. And then it says you cannot serve God and mammon. Mammon is wealth, it's riches. So very simply, you can't serve money, you can't serve lifestyle, you can't serve that fame and fortune and God. They're not a package deal. They're directly opposed to each other. And that's what Willie Nelson said himself. He said, I had to choose between being a preacher, working hard, not making much money, or singing in the clubs and having a good payday. I had to choose between God and mammon. I had to choose between serving God, teaching God, preaching God, or going out, partying, drinking, singing, but making good money in the process. And he realized, I can't serve both. I have to choose. And we know based on his own testimony, he chose mammon. He chose wealth in this world. But see, although we're not country music stars and although we're not on that level, if you will, as far as the world sees, we have to make that decision for ourselves too. When Sunday morning rolls around, do you go to church or you go to work? We have to make that decision. When Sunday night rolls around, do we go to church or we go to work? We have to make that decision. I know a lot of people, they're real faithful to church until the boss calls and said, hey, I'd love you to come in on Sunday night. We got some extra overtime for you. Yes, sir, I'll be there. Absolutely. You can't serve God and mammon. You can't chase wealth and chase God. You're going to have to choose one, because the fact is, wealth and riches and the things of this world, they're going one way. God is the other direction. You can't do both at the same time. You have to make an intentional decision, and you have to choose one and avoid the other. And that's just how it works. Now, in the process of following God, can you make money? Absolutely. Can you have a good job? Absolutely. Can you be good with your finances? And can you save? Absolutely. But you can't chase that and chase God. Chasing implies that is your motivator. Chasing implies that is what you use to make your decisions. If you make your decisions on a regular basis to honor and glorify God, if you make money in the process along the way, that's a God thing. That's fine. But if your motivator is, how can I make more money? I got to make more money. And by the way, here's my advice to everybody. Find out how much money you need to make it and then be satisfied. There's a lot of studies out there. I can't remember the name of the studies, but there's been a lot of studies, and I'm sure you can find them quickly, that there's a certain amount of money, there's a certain threshold that once people make that amount, and it varies by state and where you live, that sort of thing, but once you make enough to get by, have a house, kids are taken care of, food's on the table, once you make that much money, all the studies show that your level of happiness caps at that much money. In other words, if you're poor and you have nothing and you're needy, you're not very happy. But as you get to whatever level that is, once you get to that level of, I have what I need, I have the basics, I'm good, your level of happiness is no longer affected by money anymore. In other words, let's say that amount is $60,000 a year. You make $60,000 a year, and that's just a number. But if your happiness is capped at that $60,000, you can be a multimillionaire and you're going to be just as happy as you were at that $60,000, because once your necessities are met, happiness is no longer follows money. There's a lot of studies that show that. But as we see here, you cannot serve God and mammon. And if you're a teenager watching this, I want to encourage you. This world's going to be tempting. This world's going to do everything it can to pull you in and try to attract you and with fame and fortune, all that sort of stuff. And by the way, if Satan can pull you away from the things of God, he has no problems throwing some dollar bills your way. He has no problem giving you a good job with lots of hours and big money and a big name. And Satan has no problem doing that for you if you'll leave him. So we can't let that kind of stuff be tempting. We can't let that kind of stuff pull us away from God. Because although the world's going to look at Willie Nelson, the world's going to look at this story, and they're going to say, yeah, but look at Willie Nelson, man. He made so much money, so famous, and we admire him and want to be like him. And the fact is, look what it cost him. There's potential that he may have been called to preach by God, and instead of being called to preach, instead of being called to teach, he rejected that and said, I'm going to do my own thing. That there's a chance he was called to preach, but not only that, look how far off he got. He didn't just say, I'm not going to preach anymore. He didn't say, I'm not going to teach anymore. When you read all the testimonies and you read all the articles and you read the book, you're going to find out he got out of church completely. He was done. Born and raised Methodist, eventually Baptist, here teaching in a Baptist church. When this thing happened, when the preacher said, you need to make a choice, he didn't just say, I'm going to go find another church. He was gone. He never went back to church. He never joined another church. He was gone. Not only that, when you read this last paragraph, he fell in love with what's called the Aquarian gospel. There's a lot of weird teaching of the Aquarian gospel. They believe that there's a mother in heaven, and that's how Jesus Christ is the begotten Son of God and this mother. But a big part of that here is also reincarnation. He believes that when he dies, that he hasn't lived a perfect life yet. He's not sinless yet. He's going to come back and have another shot at it. That's not Bible. It's very unbiblical. And notice, again, that second sentence, that last paragraph, it says the old paradigm was just too cruel, just too unchristian. That's a weird terminology to use, that saying that heaven and hell, that the idea of heaven and hell, that's just unchristian. Actually, it's very Christian because it's biblical. It's a teaching of the Bible. It's who God is. And the problem is we like to put God in a logical box that we like to try to understand how he works and why he works, and we try to judge him accordingly. We're never going to be able to judge God according to our logic. He works in a different plane, a whole different universe, if you will. So very simply, I want to try to be an encouragement to you today that with this verse, that no man can serve two masters. For he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Again, trust me, I've been there. It's tempting. There's a lot of ways to make a lot of money. But a lot of times, you're going to find is those ways are on Sunday, those ways are on Wednesday night, those ways take place of soul winning, those ways take you away from your family. If we're going to have priorities, we're either going to chase God or chase money. Those are inevitably the two. You're either going to chase world fame and money and popularity and likeness and all that sort of stuff, or you're just going to chase God. And the reason that when you chase God, you don't always get that is because the world doesn't like God. The world doesn't like the things of God. So very simply, when you chase God, you're not going to get the fame. When you chase God, you're not going to get the popularity. When you chase God, you're not going to get the worldly success, because the world's going to do everything they can to put you down. The world's going to do everything again to attack you, to mock you. That's what Christianity is. We follow Christ, and what did they do to him? They mocked him. They crucified him. They accused him of everything. They hated Christ. And if we're going to follow him who they hated, they're going to hate us too. The Bible says that they hate us because they hate him. And we got to realize that. But I want to encourage you today. There's a lot of stories like Willie Nelson's. By the way, every church in America has Willie Nelson type stories in it, where there's people at a fork, at a crossroads, if you will, and it's time to make a decision. Do I want to get serious about the things of God? Or am I going to chase mammon? Am I going to chase wealth, chase riches, chase money? And if we're being honest with ourselves, a vast majority of Christians right now are chasing money. Money is dangerous. And by the way, we need money. Money is part of life. For some reason, when you want to buy a house, they want money. When you buy a car, they want money. When you pay for your energy bill, they want money. There's not a problem with money, but there is a problem, the Bible says, with the love of money. For the love of money is the root of all evil. Because here, if you love God, you chase him. But if you love money, you'll chase that. There's a problem when you love money. We need money, but we should not love it. We love God, and we need God. I hope that's a blessing to you. As always, subscribe to the channel if this helped you. Leave a comment down below if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, as always. And I hope you have a good day today, and God bless.